Break all the rules. Add reverb to your 808s. Add distortion to your reverb. Do you want to make your own drum kit, but maybe you're intimidated by the process? Or maybe you don't know where to start or feel like you don't have enough know-how to make dope sound? That's what we're going to fix today. What's up, everyone? My name is SIKKY. I'm a producer here in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And over the years, I've put out a couple of kits, free and paid, and they've been used by well over 40,000 different producers all around the world. So I think I have a couple of things that might help make the process a little easier for you guys. There's a couple of things that I have to get out of the way, and these are really important. Number one, making sounds is incredibly easy. Literally anyone can do it. Number two, some of the things that I'm going to show you today are going to come as a surprise. You got to keep an open mind if you want to get the most out of this video. And number three, this video is sponsored by my friend Oversampled and his plugin Panks. I think he pronounced it Punch, but it's spelled P-A-N-C-Z, so we're going to call it Panks. Forgive me if that's not how you're supposed to pronounce it, but really excited about this. And can we just take one extra second to appreciate how amazing the lighting and everything looks right now? This might be the go-to setup for future videos. So videos can be broken down into 4 different sections, and these are the things that I'm going to answer. In the first section, I'm going to talk to you guys about 5 different methods that I know of for creating your own sound. In section 2, it's about the tools and plugins that you might need to get started. In section 3, we're actually going to make some sounds. We're going to use the 4 methods. We're going to use the plugins that I mentioned. And in section 4, I'm going to give you guys some helpful tips, some things to avoid doing, some things that are going to make your workflow better, things like that. Anyways, if all of that sounds good, I have a feeling this might be a long one, so grab yourself a little snack, maybe a drink, and yeah, let's get into this video. Section 1, 5 methods for making drum sounds. The very first method isn't going to come as a surprise to you, but we all know that this happens. And that is take sounds from kits that you like, process them to make them your own. Over the years, I've noticed that producers like using sounds that are used by their favorite producers. And even though these sounds might be recycled, it hasn't stopped Reddit's r/drum kits from being such a popular place for producers to go and get their sounds. We all know that there's a lot of sounds that are recycled on. Method number 2 is to use digital plugins. Something like X4 Records Serum is a really popular one, and you can make both drum sounds and instrument sounds with that plugin and then process them with any other digital plugins that you have available. Method number 3 is to sample sounds from analog or vintage drum machines like the TR-808 or the Lindrum. Now, I know that this might be out of reach for a lot of producers, but I want to make sure that I'm thorough and give you guys all the information. Method number 4 is to record real instruments or Foley sounds with either a handheld recorder or something like this microphone, but we'll go into more detail in section 2 of this video. Method number 5, probably my favorite one so far, is to combine a little bit of everything so you get the best of all the worlds. Analog drum machines have a certain sound to them. Digital plugins are very clean and pristine. Foley sounds that you might record on your microphone, percussion sounds you might record with a microphone, have a certain sound to them that you might not be able to recreate. And combining everything can give you the best of both worlds. Section number 2, tools and plugins. When it comes to plugins and tools, I want you to forget that these tools were ever created for a specific purpose. Instead, I want you to view them as chisels and hammers to shape your sound. Abuse them, push them to the extreme, because when it comes to sound design, it's the one time that I feel like I can do absolutely anything. There's literally no wrong way of doing things. Okay, so tools. The very first one that I want to tell you guys about is probably one that you're holding right now. You're not surprised to hear that it's your cell phone. Everyone's got one of these nowadays, and the microphones over the years have gotten really, really good. The second tool I want to tell you guys about is this microphone. Now, I think this microphone costs about maybe $40 or $50. I'm going to leave it linked in the description. Highly recommend this. Get yourself a TRRS cable, and you have a better microphone than the one built into your phone. Now, if you want to crank things up to another level, I would recommend something like this. This is a handheld recorder. This is the Zoom H5 recorder. I think this was about like $400. It's got 2 microphones built in at the top. You can plug in additional microphones at the bottom. There are cheaper options. I will leave those linked in the description as well. And the last tool I can think of is some sort of percussion instruments. On Amazon, you can actually buy these for like 50 bucks and get a whole box of random different bits. So plugins. First one that I would recommend is one called Vital. It's free. You can get it linked in the description. Tool number 2 is OTT, over the top something. Linked in the description, made by X4 Records, absolute must-have plugin. Number 3 is also made by X4 Records, and it's called Serum. And the fourth tool I've been using quite heavily on my new drum kit Monarch, especially when you're making drum sounds, is some sort of transient shaper. I've used a number of these over the years. I didn't know what I was missing until my homie Oversample sent over the plugin that he created called Punch. I like calling it Panks because That's how it spells and looks. If you don't know what a transient designer is, it's a plugin slash tool that's used to control the dynamics of a sound, but a different way than compressor would be able to do. And Oversample has given me a 25% off discount code, which you can find linked in the description. And I think the best way to show you is to play this TR-808 sample that I have here and kind of show you how it works. So I'm going to exaggerate the transient, the very beginning of the snare drum. Makes it nice and punchy. Maybe I want to make the length of it a little bit longer. That's bringing up the tail of this sample. What I think makes the plugin really cool is you have a soft clipper and a limiter, and you can pick either or using this switch down here, and you can set the threshold slash ceiling for when this limiter slash soft clipper takes effect. So watch this. I'm gonna exaggerate the transient, and I'm gonna have it soft clip the transient. I want to make it a little bit more beefier of a sound, so I'm going to turn up this New York compression knob, which is going to squeeze the piss out of it. And again, no rules to this, but it's going to sound cool. And then I'm going to make the tail of it a little bit shorter to make it a little bit more punchier. Another thing I like about this is that it has two EQ controls, a presence and an air knob, so you can kind of add in a little bit of brightness or some airiness to your sample. And where I think this goes absolutely nuts is the fact that you can do all of this in multi-band. I'm gonna set this band here over to the main body of the sound. I'm gonna exaggerate that. And then high frequencies, I'm gonna exaggerate those as well. And then to really just seal the deal, you have a dry mix knob to blend in the original signal with this exaggerated signal. And that's all you need. It can literally take this very generic sounding TR-808 snare and turn it into this beefy modern sound. Overall, I think this is a super important plugin to have in your arsenal when you're making sounds. Anyway, so those are the tools and plugins I recommend. Let's move to the next section. Section 3, making the sounds. A quick disclaimer, this section of the video is going to be somewhat cut down just because of how long sometimes it takes to make certain sounds, and I want to try and cover as many different types of sound in as little amount of time as possible. And I think the easiest sound that I can start with is to make a hi-hat, because I can make this with stock plugins and kind of tweak them with some other stuff as well. Let's fill up every 2 steps, and I'm going to turn down the volume of oscillator 2 and oscillator 3. Now, when it comes to making sounds, you want to think about what the general tone of a sound is, and hi-hats are pretty bright sounding. This dice-shaped icon is the one, this white noise. And you're like, that doesn't sound like a hi-hat. We'll get there. We're going to shape the volume of that sound, kind of getting close. We're gonna turn all these down, and then we're gonna turn down the sustain. That sounds a little bit closer. Now we want to change the actual tone of the sound. So I'm gonna go over here to the filter section. I'm gonna make it a band pass, BP filter. I'm gonna turn up the resonance, and I'm gonna come back here a little bit with the envelope and tighten up the sound a little bit more. Now I'm gonna route the sound over to insert 1. We're gonna start processing it a little bit. Something that I always like to have in my chain is some type of EQ. Fruity parametric EQ is more than good enough. We're gonna cut out the low end. We're gonna exaggerate a little bit of this. That sounds cool. I think we can further enhance the transient of our sound here. I'm gonna open up punch, and it's gonna exaggerate the very beginning of the sound. I'm gonna turn it over to limiter because I don't really want distortion on the hi-hat, and I'm just gonna boost the input gain, drive it harder into that. And then I'm gonna blend it in. The next step is to pull up something like Edison. I'm gonna hit the record, play the sample once, stop recording. I'm going to normalize the sample to hit this other button, which is going to trim the silence at the end of the sample and the beginning of the sample. And lastly, I'm going to add a really, really tiny fade at the beginning of the sample and a really, really tiny fade at the end of the sample. You-click here, and you'll see that it made a little fade right at the beginning and one at the end. And there's our hi-hat sample, and there's our hi-hat sample. Okay, let's take things up a notch and let's make a snare drum sound. Before we get started doing that, I want to ask you guys to hit the subscribe button if you found any part of this video valuable, or hit that thumbs up. It goes a long way in helping out this channel reach more people. Before we make the snare drum sound, I want to show you an example of a TR-808. This is a sample of a TR-808. And what I hear is the fundamental tone, the body of that sound. And on the equalizer, we can see that the snare drum is focused around 300 Hertz and 170 Hertz. To make the snare drum sound, I'm actually going to build it, the X4 Records Serum plugin, and we're going to put in our note. Go down to analog, BD sine wave, and I'm going to use envelope 2 to shape the general volume of that tone. So we're going to bring this down, the sustain down. You can see it's kind of hitting around 286. And then maybe on the second oscillator here, the same BD sine envelope down to that 167 Hertz we saw when we were listening to the TR-808. We know that there was a noisy layer to the snare drum. That's what we're going to try and recreate here with this. Okay, so I'm going to turn off the oscillator. We don't want to hear the fundamental tone, just the noise. I'm going to add another envelope here and have it. That kind of gets close. Cool. I'm going to add a filter to that sound. I'm going to again pull up the bandpass filters. I'm going to turn on oscillator A and oscillator B. I remove the filter and I'm going to now turn on the noise. And then I'm going to go over to the effects section. I'm going to put on a little distortion. Cool. Okay, we're getting closer to a snare drum sound. And then maybe I'm going to put on a little EQ here to boost the high end of this noise a little bit shorter. I'm going to make the main, higher up octave. There we go. You see, you'll notice it's a lot of back and forth between a lot of these parameters to finally get it to a point where it sounds kind of like a snare drum. And to really finally get there, I'm going to route this to an empty mixer track. And this is super important. This is how I really get the sound of this to really punch. I have the EQ here to kind of really shape the overall tone, and then this to kind of shape the shape of the sound, whether it's punchy, soft. I'm gonna have it on soft clipper. And on the filter, I'm gonna turn on, again, coming back, playing with the noise a little bit more. There. And all of a sudden, it's sounding close enough to this snare, but in a more modern sense, I guess. And all I'm gonna do is open up another instance of Edison, turn on record, and I'm gonna hit play. There's my sound. And then again, I'm gonna hit normalize. I'm going to trim the side, silence noises, declick the beginning, declick the end. Anyways, I'm getting lost in the sauce for a second there. And the next sound I'm gonna make is probably one of the more complicated sounds to make, just because of how much back and forth and tweaking one needs to do to get it close. And that is to make a clap sound. Now, so far we've made sounds using both stock plugins and we've made sounds using paid for plugins. What I want to do now is to use a different method, which is a combination of both creating a sound with a plugin and layering it with analog drum machine sounds, as well as Foley sounds that I have. We're going to start off by building just a very simple clap, which I have right here. And to quickly explain what I've done here, I've started with noise oscillator, which I've picked the ARP white preset here, mapped the LFO to the levels here, and created the rough shape of a clap sound. The noise is then running into this filter to shape the tone of the sound. And the last thing that I want to do is I want to add a little distortion, something like this. And then maybe I want to put on a little EQ to kind of exaggerate the high end a little bit. Kind of sounds like a clap. And then to further enhance this, I'm going to layer it with a drum machine sample. I'm going to copy over the pattern, layer them together and play it. I'm going to normalize the sample. You know what? I'm going to use a tail of the sample. I can fade in the beginning of the sample and the end of the sample. Sounds kind of cool. I think we can pitch it up to get a little bit more of a higher pristine sounding sample. That sounds cool as well. And then maybe I want to layer on this rim sound. I don't know. I'm just doing things now. And this is where I've kind of got the sound somewhat close, but I feel like it could still be a little bit better sounding. And this is where the filter and something like punch comes great. So we've got the EQ. I'm going to set it to my default preset here. I'm going to cut out the low end, add a little bit of the higher end. Maybe even do a little bit of a dip and contrast there. And then I'm going to exaggerate the transient of this, bring down the threshold, and I'm going to decide between the soft clipper and the limiter to see which one of these two sounds better. Maybe a little newer compression. What does the limiter sound like? Kind of softens the sound, which is not a bad thing. Oh, that's it. That's it. That's the bit right there. I almost don't even need the EQ, to be honest with you, with the air knob already in there. Going to Edison, record the sample, normalize it, trim the end, declick the beginning, declick the end. Now we got a clap sound. The time stretcher, the pitch shifter, play with different algorithms. Sounds kind of cool. We're going to normalize it again, Control N, declick the beginning, declick the end, and now we've got a clap sample. We got a hi-hat sample, snare sample, we got a clap sample. Okay, that doesn't sound too bad to me. I'm going to move into making some weirder sounds. I got this sound here. Sound from a drum machine again, and I'm going to just mess it up, normalize it. Actually, I'm going to bring it up into Edison, and we're not even going to synthesize anything. We're just going to do pure pitch manipulation, time warping. I'm going to hit Alt-T to bring up the time stretcher. And then I think oh, we got a cool sound there, y'all. That's our sound. Stretch this out even more. Stretch it out more. That's a lot. And then we're going to hit the blur tool. I don't like the beginning of that sound. Awesome. And then I'm just going to declick the beginning and normalize it, bring it back into my session. And we started again with that little cowbell sounding thing. I think it's a cowbell. Yeah, that's a cowbell sound. And I think we can still go a little further. So I'm going to route this to its own mixer track. And then I'm going to put on Punch OTT, which is an over-the-top compression plugin. There we go. And actually, you know what? Let me check out some of these presets. Let's see what we can get here. Oh, okay. Oh, I like that one. That one sounds the nicest to me. OTT. I'm going to turn this up a little bit. Now we have our little sound. Normalize, trim up the side noise, declick the beginning, declick the end. Honestly, this whole time, I've just been putting stuff on, trying different things, and just having fun with it. There's no rules. Like, I was putting OTT on, I was exaggerating the high end, I was distorting things unnecessarily, but that's what it took to turn those weird sounds that I was making inside of Edison sometimes, putting a little blur on it to soften out the weirdness and the artifacts that made it sound cool, but maybe kind of smoothed it out a little bit more. So it's all just a lot of back and forth. Okay, let's move to the final section of this video. Section 4. Helpful tips. Over the years, I've made a lot of drum samples and I've made mistakes while making them too. And I want to kind of help you avoid some of those mistakes in this section. So the very first thing I want to tell you guys about is normalizing your sample. For example, let's take this clap. Nothing wrong with it, it's a fine sounding sample, but I found that it's better to normalize all of your samples. Normalizing just means that the whole sample is hitting a maximum of 0 dB. Simple enough to do in Edison. You just click this icon here, or you can come down to the wrench tool and click normalize, Control-N. Learn the shortcuts. The second helpful tip that I have for you guys is to make sure that you export your sample as 24-bit audio files. Some DAWs like Logic Pro X actually create second file when someone drags the original file into their session after Logic has converted it from a 32-bit file into a 24-bit file. And you can do that in FL Studio by simply coming to the save menu on the left here, save sample as 24-bit WAV file. Now, sample rate 44.1 is probably the bare minimum that I would recommend. Anything higher is totally fine. The third helpful tip I got for you is a couple of bad edits that I've noticed inside of other people's drum kit. I've got a sample here from someone's drum kit, and you'll notice that there's a bit of dead air at the beginning, and there's this weird little glitchy moment at the end. I don't think that's super necessary, so you can actually get rid of it, Control X, and then you can come to the beginning over here. If you take a look, there's not really much there, so I can delete that as well. And the last thing is to always declick the beginning and end of your sample. You can do that by right-clicking on this shape here, which will give you a short declick. Left-clicking it will make a fade in. Right-click to declick, left-click to fade in, and that'll declick the end. Here's another example. I got the sample pulled up, which I know has a click at the very beginning. This little click at the beginning is more of a bad edit and poor quality control, if I'm honest. It's a very simple fix. Just right click on the declick. It'll declick the beginning of the sample, and select the whole sample, declick the beginning, declick the end. That's how easy it is. And then just save it, export it as a 24-bit file. I got another example I want to show you, and this specific one has a lot of silence at the end of the sample. The reason why this is a bad thing is because having the silence unnecessarily there can increase the size of your drum kit. It'll be slower for your customers to download the file, and it's going to be unnecessarily large, which is just going to be annoying for people to save onto their hard drives. It's a simple fix. Again, you can either select just the silence here, or you can select the whole sample and then click this trim side noise. Now, if you do the trim side noise, you always want to declick the beginning and declick the end, and then save it as a sample. The last couple of helpful tips I have for you is this. Focus on creating a ton of sounds, but focus on making one type of sound one day and a different type of sound another day. When I made Pandora, I made over 8,000 different sounds, and I made snare drums for a couple of days, and I have like 300, 400 different snare drums, and then I made percussions a different day. And then when I was ready to put that kit out, I went through all these different snare drum sounds and picked the best quality ones that I thought sounded the best. Focus on bulk and then curate the quality. The most important thing I can tell you guys is that practice makes perfect. If you just make 100 samples, you're not going to be as good as someone who's made thousands and hundreds of thousands of samples. And the more you make and the more you try different things and different workflows, the better your sounds are going to be. My current drum kit, Pandora, I feel like is leaps and bounds ahead of my very first drum kit. And I feel like I've learned so much over the last few years that have allowed me to create the quality that I make today. And the last thing is have fun with it. There's literally no rules to this. In fact, break all the rules. Add reverb to your 808s, add distortion to your reverb. Why does reverb get such a bad rep? But anyways, have fun with it. Break all the rules. Make hundreds and hundreds of samples until you're happy with it. It's really not that complicated. Now, I've thought about doing a course or a one-on-one call with producers going really in depth when it comes to sound design. If that's something that you might be interested in, please let me know in the comments. I'm still working on the Monarch drum kit, so hopefully that will be out soon. And again, if you guys found anything in this video helpful, make sure to smash that thumbs up. It means the world to me. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.